The sun had begun to fall behind the distant ridges, bleeding gold and rust into the sky like someone had dragged a knife across the day's belly. The land lay wide and hushed beneath it, not dead but waiting, always waiting. Grass brittle, as old parchment swayed in small waves, whispering their secrets to the wind. The house stood alone at the valley's center, its boards faded to the color of ash, its porch leaning just enough to speak of time but not collapse. Smoke curled thin and steady from the chimney, its path clean and undisturbed. Out back, a barn. Door swung slow, creaking every so often like it was remembering something. A single rope clacked against its hook-steady familiar. The silence was not absence, it was presence. A silence full of memory. Full of waiting. Inside the house, the man sat at the kitchen table, his elbows planted square, his hands lined like tree bark. He wore a shirt the same color as the dust outside, sleeves rolled to forearms that knew work. His face bore the weather sun, and Storm had written poems there he never read aloud. He wasn't old, not really, but the quiet had carved years into him. His name wasn't spoken often, hadn't been needed in quite some time. He unfolded a letter. The edges were soft with handling, the ink faded but not gone. He didn't read it, not this time. Just stared. Some nights he did that. Other nights, he read it aloud, the words broken up by sips of weak whiskey and long, unblinking pauses. Outside, the world turned to amber. And just as the sun's final edge met the ridge, he caught it. Dust. Moving, he stood slowly, without hurry, but without doubt, and stepped onto the porch. His boots struck the wood with the kind of sound that echoed long in empty places. He narrowed his eyes. Coming up the south trail, barely more than a thread through the grass, was a covered wagon. The mule was thin-hipped and tired. The canvas over the frame looked hand-mended in 3 places at least. No colors or marks, just road wear and hope holding it together. He stayed where he was, arms crossed, breath even. The wagon rolled to a stop just near the edge of the fence line. For a long time, nobody moved. Then they stepped down. 3 women, not loud, not proud, just present. One wore a clay-colored dress, her hair bound in a way that had once been neat. Another's hands went straight to the mule's bridle like she didn't need to ask permission to tend something in need. The third, in yellow linen dulled by dust, looked up at the house. Her eyes didn't beg. They didn't offer thanks in advance either. They just met his. There were children, a boy and 2 girls. They clung to skirts and stood quiet. The smallest girl held a handmade doll tight to her chest. The boy looked at the house the way a man might eye a distant river after days without water. He didn't speak. Not yet. The women waited. One of them shifted her weight, maybe nervous, maybe just sore from the ride. The wind swept through, brushing loose strands of hair across their cheeks. The sun had dipped now. Shadows stretched long and cool. He didn't want visitors. The land didn't want them either. It took too long to warm up again after people had come and gone. The silence had gotten into the floorboards, into the bones of the place, and he liked it that way. Silence didn't ask anything of him. Silence didn't forget to say goodbye, but there was something in their eyes. Not pity. Not fear. Not even hope exactly. Just weariness, and maybe he recognized that. Maybe it reminded him of a man he used to see in the mirror before his boy or his wife, or whichever name it was that stopped echoing down the hallway. He stepped down off the porch, not bothering to take his time this time. The crunch of gravel beneath his boots was the only thing that moved. The boy took a small step back. One of the women rested her hand on his shoulder, and he stilled. "You can stay," he said, voice hoarse from disuse. He didn't say more. Not. Where, not how long. Just enough. They nodded. A simple gesture, but full of weight. He turned and walked back toward the barn, half expecting they'd follow, half expecting they'd vanish like a mirage born of too much loneliness. But when he turned, they were still there. That night, the house wasn't quiet. Not quite. Soft footsteps moved across the wood. A kettle sang low on the stove. A child whispered a song to her doll. One of the women wiped dust from the table with her sleeve before setting bread down. None of them talked much, and neither did he. but the porch held more than one pair of boots. And a blanket hung on the line, caught moonlight. He told himself it was just one night, that he was being decent, that they'd be gone by dawn. Like all things that weren't meant to stay, but as he sat back at the table, letter folded beside. A new cup of coffee he hadn't brewed himself. Something old and brittle inside him shifted. The wind had changed. Ever so slightly, and the silence, for the first time in years, felt a little less like comfort and a little more like ... space. Space for something else. Something not yet named. He didn't sleep much that night, but he didn't mind. Section 2. Where footsteps leave no echo, approximately 2,000 words, Wild West tale, poetic. Slow, soulful. The morning came soft, not in light but in presence. It didn't shout with sun rays through windows or clang of pans, no rooster claiming dominion. No, this morning breathed, gentle as smoke. The kind of morning where dust lifts without cause and settles without notice. The rancher stirred with the quiet, not from habit but from something different. Something curious, not quite comfort. Something was moving in the house that hadn't moved in years. And it wasn't the wind. He rose slowly, rubbing sleep from eyes used to waking alone. His boots hit the floorboard and met not silence, but something softer. A sound he hadn't heard in too long. Call on laughter. Not full, not loud. Just a bell-chimed giggle from a child chasing something outside. A hen maybe, or a breeze. It struck him. Like music heard in a dream, too beautiful to believe, yet too real to ignore. He opened the front door. There they were. One woman was crouched on the porch, scrubbing wood with a wet cloth. The boards hadn't seen such attention in years. She was humming lonesome tune older than any hymn. She didn't look up when he stepped out, just kept scrubbing, as though the work itself held her grief at bay. Another woman stood over a small fire pit near the corral, coaxing the flames beneath a blackened coffee pot. She moved with quiet efficiency. Not rushing, not fumbling. Like someone who'd spent enough of her life making do with little and making it last. The third, golden-haired and sun-browned, was walking the perimeter with a girl no older than 6. They paused near the chicken coop, where the girl, giggling, tossed grain into the dirt. The chickens clucked and danced around her feet, and the woman simply watched, one hand shielding her brow from the rising sun. He meant to speak. Meant to tell them it's time now, that one night was all he'd promised. But the words caught in his throat like splinters. They weren't intruding, weren't asking, they were simply here. Not taking, giving. He stood there for a time, unnoticed, or perhaps simply ignored in the way only those without need for approval can manage. The wind picked up. The scent of firewood and scorched beans wrapped around him like a memory. Eventually he stepped back inside. Didn't close the door. The days that followed did not unfold so much as unravel, slowly, like a thread being pulled gently loose from a garment. Woven long ago, the women moved like they belonged to the land, not conquering it, not decorating it, just understanding it. They knew how to mend what was broken without asking if it should be. They knew what corners needed sweeping and which sounds meant something needed oil. One morning, he watched as the woman in clay quietly renailed a shutter that had long hung askew. She didn't ask for his hammer. She used a stone. Another time, the golden-haired woman brushed dust from the piano in the corner of the parlor. She didn't play it, just cleaned it. Polished each key like it might remember its own tune. The children filled the empty spaces like wildflowers in a long abandoned field. Their bare feet slapped against the floorboards. Their whispers curled around the doorframes. Once, he caught the youngest girl crouched in the dirt beside his saddle, humming to herself while drawing circles in the dust with a stick. He found himself watching from the shadows more often than not. Not out of caution, but from a kind of awe. One afternoon, he noticed the gate latch had come loose where one of the women leaned while snapping peas. He fetched a nail and fixed it without speaking. She looked up briefly, eyes calm, then returned to her task. No thank you. No nod. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was respectful. Another evening, he brought extra firewood to the hearth where they sat after supper. The air had turned. The woman by the fire, holding the middle child on her lap, reached for A blanket, but stopped when she saw him there, arms full of cedar. She nodded, not in gratitude, but recognition. He realized something strange then. They'd begun to leave space for him, too. Conversations came next. Not deep ones. Not yet, just passing murmurs, exchanged like coins in the hallway, that waters. Warm now if you need. There's biscuits left in the tin. Storm's coming. Can smell it in the air. The sound of the ranch changed. Slowly, humming while laundry hung. A lullaby in a voice that cracked but carried. Footsteps that didn't echo. Because they weren't alone anymore. One evening after supper, he found a scrap of paper resting on his chair, a child's drawing. Crayon. Lines scrawled across the page, some crooked representation of the house. The chickens, a stick figure man with a big hat. Below it, in shaky letters. "That's you, mister." He stared at it for a long time, the way one stares at an old wound, not because it hurts, but because it once did, and that memory never leaves completely. He didn't put the drawing away. He set it on the mantel. He never told them he fixed. The wagon. One afternoon, while the sun hung high and they were resting in the shade, he crept around to the back and replaced the busted axle beam, sanded the slats, tightened the bolts. He worked quiet, steady, the kind of work he liked where the doing of it was the speaking of it. When they saw it the next day, none of them said a word. They simply began loading it a little at a time, as if preparing, as if considering, but not rushing, never rushing. It was nearly dusk when she wandered into the barn, the strongest of the three, the one with the look of someone who'd weathered too many tempests to fear another. She carried a broom and moved with purpose. The others had gone to gather eggs. The children were asleep on blankets beneath the porch. She swept slowly. Dust swirled in the light, shafting through the rafters, and then she found it beneath a pile of old horse blankets tucked near the edge of a hay bale, a photograph curled at the corners. Edges, YELLOUD. It showed a woman smiling with eyes too bright to last long, and a boy, maybe 5 or 6, holding a carved wooden toy horse. The kind no store sold. The kind made by hands that loved. The barn fell still. She didn't ask, didn't cry. She wiped it clean with the hem of her skirt and carried it to the porch. Set it down by the lantern. Then she went inside, without a word. That night, he found it, the photograph, the ghost he didn't speak of, didn't invite to supper. He stared at it a long time, fingers running over the ridged lines of a smile he hadn't seen in years. The porch creaked beneath him, but no one joined him. The sky was deep with stars. He didn't cry. Not really, but something loosened. Something warm and heavy that had sat beneath his ribs for 2 long without moving. He leaned back in his chair and let the night settle around him like a worn blanket. Somewhere inside, he thought of the wagon, fixed and ready. Thought of the women and the way they worked without asking. The children and their laughter that filled the hollow spaces. He wasn't sure if they were staying, wasn't sure if he'd ask them to. But for the first time in a long time, the idea of someone staying didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a seed, one that might grow slow and quiet beneath the soil of his heart, if only the silence let it. And tonight it just might. The storm came without drama, no thunder ahead of it, no lightning tearing the sky. Just a slow thickening of the air, like the earth itself had taken a deep breath and decided not to let it go. The clouds rolled in low and heavy, turning the wide open sky into something close and soft, like the underside of a wool blanket. He noticed the shift in the birds first, how their songs quieted, how they dipped closer to the ground. Then came the wind, restless and strange, picking up skirts, tossing dry leaves across the porch. By evening, the rain had begun in earnest. Not a downpour, not angry, just steady, endless. It tapped on the windows, slid down the wood, soaked the wagon cover, and made everything smell of raw earth and wet cedar. The kind of rain that seeps into the bones of a place, makes it settle deeper into itself. The kind of rain you don't travel through. So they stayed. Another day, and then another, and another. Still, the ranch, once so still you could hear the tick of dust settling on a bookshelf, became a place of warmth, of small sounds that stitched themselves into the rhythm of the days. The fire never stopped burning. A low, kind heat that turned the air gold. Meals were cooked slowly, with care. Someone found a sack of flour tucked high in the pantry, nearly forgotten. And somehow, under hands that knew what to do with very little, it became biscuits, then dumplings, then something close to cake. The smell lingered through the rooms. Laughter did too, from the kitchen, from under quilts, from the loft, where the children built forts of old horse blankets and hay. It wasn't loud, that laughter. It was gentle, like it didn't want to break the spell, like it knew it was somewhere. It didn't quite belong, but hoped to stay a while. He found himself smiling without noticing. He also found himself watching her more, the one who always stepped back when others stepped forward. The one who fixed things without being asked. She moved through the house as though it didn't belong to her, and yet made it better just by passing through it. She never touched what wasn't hers, but everything she touched stayed a little. Longer. One evening, the rain deepened, drumming on the roof like a memory that wanted to be let in. The children were asleep early, worn out from running through puddles and chasing chickens in slick mud. The other two women had gone to the barn. To check on the mule. She stayed behind, sitting at the table, her hands folded on a teacup gone cold. He sat across from her. No words passed between them at first. Just the sound of the rain. And the fire, and the silence of people who understand each other without needing to say how. Then he spoke, not loudly, not suddenly. Just like the storm, gentle, steady. He told her about the tree near the backfield. The cottonwood that bloomed too early every spring, always threatening frostbite but never quite dying. He said he buried someone there. A boy, or maybe it was a woman. Or maybe both. He didn't say their names, but the way his voice dropped, the way he looked not at her but through her, made it clear. Whoever they were the reason he hadn't spoken to another soul in years. The reason he fed his horses but not himself some days. The reason he folded and unfolded that letter every night. Like prayer, she didn't try to comfort him, didn't say sorry, didn't say she understood. She just stayed, looking at him like he wasn't broken, like he was simply human. Later, when the fire had burned low and the tea had been warmed again, she spoke too. Her voice didn't tremble. She spoke of a man who left. Not in death, but in decision. A man who had made promises with eyes and words and then walked out the door one morning and never walked back through it. She told him of the hunger that followed. Not just for food, but for safety, for stillness, for kindness that didn't need to be earned. She didn't sound bitter, just tired, but there was something in her voice, something strong, like leather worn soft but not broken. They didn't speak again that night. They just sat. He passed her another log for the fire. She passed him a piece of bread, still warm from the oven. Their fingers brushed, not on purpose, but not by accident either. After that, something shifted. They didn't talk more, but they began to move around each other. Differently, she'd refill his cup without asking. He'd leave tools near the step, where she mended things. He found her scarf drying by the hearth and folded it neatly, setting it where he knew she'd find it. She noticed the way he stood when the wind changed direction and brought him a shawl before he could fetch one. At meals. Their eyes met across the table. Not long, not lingering. Just long enough to say, "I see you." The other two women noticed. They didn't tease, didn't nudge, just smiled sometimes. Softly, like they knew what it was to heal in the company of someone who didn't ask you to hurry. The children began to include him in their drawings. Now he was in the center. Stick figure man, big hat, smiling, one day. The girl with the doll slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the barn. He didn't flinch, he didn't pull away. He just let her stay there. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused ones, and inside, something long forgotten stirred, not like fire, but like seeds beneath earth. Quiet. Patient. Ready. The days passed like slow, moving clouds, light shifting across the land in long silken ribbons. Meals cooked without hurry, fences mended in silence, and laughter echoing soft through the trees. The rain had stopped. The earth had drunk deeply. And now everything smelled of green. Of life beginning again. He thought perhaps they would leave soon. The wagon had been ready for weeks. No one said it, but the thought hung in the air like summer's heat. Not a threat, just the natural pull. Of the road, he didn't ask. He didn't want to know. Some things you let be until they say otherwise. The woman he watched more than the others had begun planting things near the porch. Herbs in cracked pots, sage, mint. Tiny things, barely sprouted, but the roots took hold in the soil like they'd been waiting for this land, like they knew it would hold them. One morning, before the sun had yet shaken off the mist, he was out near the barn, feeding the mule and listening to the rhythmic crunch of hooves in hay. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the kind that belonged to children at play. Not the kind the wind carried from distant hills. These were close, mean. He stepped outside. A man rode up from the southern trail, slouched in the saddle, his horse lathered with sweat, his coat unbuttoned and stained. He wore a crooked smile, and his eyes glinted like bottles shattered in dirt. He pulled up hard near the fence, spitting dust and disdain. The woman froze at the corner of the house. Her breath left her body like a kicked-up flame. One hand reached behind her, searching blindly for the child who had been gathering stones. Just moments before, the man pointed. "There she is," he slurred, loud enough for the wind to carry. "My wife, my girl, thought you could run from me?" No one moved. He swung off his horse and tossed the reins like a man who knew he wouldn't be told no. His boots hit the ground with a heavy, confident thud. "She's mine," he growled. "And that one too." He jabbed a finger toward the child. "Ain't no one takes what's mine and walks free." The rancher said nothing, not yet. He stepped down from the porch with a steadiness that made the air hold its breath. He didn't yell, didn't grab the rifle that leaned just inside the door. He didn't need to. He stood at the gate, and he waited. The man sneered. "You think you scare me? You think you can keep her?" Still, no answer, but there was something in the way the rancher stood, something ancient, not proud, not angry, just resolved, the kind of silence that speaks louder than gunfire. The child clung to her mother's skirt, eyes wide, breath shallow. The woman's hands trembled, but her feet stayed planted behind the man who now stood between her and the life she'd escaped. The other women stood nearby, hands tight around the children, not interfering, but not backing down either. It was not just one man standing at the gate. It was the weight of peace hard won. The strength of a place built slowly and gently, and filled now with something that had not existed when she arrived. Belonging. The man took another step forward. That was when the rancher spoke. "She's not yours." Simple, flat, a truth, not a challenge. She was never yours. The man paused, his lip curled. "What do you know about it, huh? What gives you the right?" "I didn't take her," the rancher said, voice like gravel under boot. "She came here with her child. You didn't come looking with love. You came looking with fists. That's all I need to know." A standoff measured not in bullets but breath. The man's hand twitched toward his coat, where something dark and heavy likely waited. The rancher took a half step forward, not reaching for the rifle, not lifting his voice, just existing so solidly that it made the earth feel smaller. "There's nothing here for you," he said. "Not today, not tomorrow." The wind picked up, and maybe, just maybe, it whispered through the trees in a way that made even cruelty pause. Because the cruel don't always fear guns, but they do fear conviction, real conviction. The kind you can't shout over. The kind that roots itself so deep into the land that no storm can wash it away. The man spat. Cursed. Looked past the rancher, toward the woman, waiting for her to flinch, to reach out. To hesitate, she didn't. Her hand rested on her child's back, solid and steady. Her chin lifted just enough. He turned, mounted. Another word, he rode off. Dust curling behind him like a snake retreating to its hole. The sound faded, and still, the rancher didn't move, not until he could no longer hear hooves, not until the woman stepped out from behind him and placed her hand gently on his arm, not out of fear, but thanks. That night, as stars began to stitch silver across the sky, she stood on the porch beside him. The other children were asleep, curled like kittens on the quilts. The other women inside, whispering stories in soft tones. She didn't ask permission, she just stayed beside him. Then, after a long moment, she spoke. "I'm not leaving." He didn't look at her, but she saw the way his shoulders lowered. The way the air around him softened. "I'm not staying because I'm afraid," she said. "I'm staying because I'm not." He didn't answer, but she knew he heard, and the next morning, the wagon sat still under the same patch of sun it always had, the mule untethered, the wheels untouched. The other women didn't mention leaving either. They planted more herbs, cleaned out the loft, built a swing from an old rope and a broken barrel stave. The boy hung from it like a branch in spring, laughter echoing down the slope. The ranch was no longer quiet, not in the way it had been now. It held the sounds of life. A woman's dress danced on the line like a flag of something hard-earned. A child's voice called from the field. "Look what I found." Someone chopped wood out back. Someone hummed near the stove. And inside, the rancher sat at the table, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. No letter, no ghost today. Just a drawing, crayon, a little worn at the edges, a house, some chickens, a mule. 3 stick-figure women, 3 children, and a man, right in the middle. This time, he was smiling, and this time he was meant to be there. Sometimes. Love doesn't gallop in with noise and promises. Sometimes, it walks beside you quietly for days and weeks, saying nothing loud, offering nothing flashy, until one day you turn to your left, and you realize you're no longer alone.